Well, good morning and thank you for watching Citizen Power Breakfast. My name is Michelle Morgan and we're about to delve into our interview. This morning we have Dr. Agnes Zani, who is the nominated senator for Kwale. She is here in studio. Dr. Zani, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
So if we look at when we saw you last, this was the beginning of the week,
yes.
On Tuesday, when you read the statement at the CORD meeting at Orange House, in which CORD really was demanding for the establishment of a commission of inquiry into the Westgate attack. And I quote, you said that if this doesn't happen within 2 weeks, any means necessary will be taken for the truth to come out. So let me start by asking, is CORD insinuating that there is an ulterior motive or some kind of suspect agenda at play here?
I think the Westgate episode brought in many factors and many issues that Kenyans needed to begin to sit and think and pause about. The way we responded, general issues of security, because terrorists had actually camped in some of the shops at the malls. And basically Kenyans, and through the last 3 months, for example, there's been a lot of talk about the insecurity in this country. Westgate, if you wish, was the climax of a security situation that began to make the country talk. And it was the basis of the Nyumba Kumi. Everybody now is in a state of fear because nobody knows what is going to happen to them tomorrow. And I think the basic notion in Kenyans' minds is that we need to do something about it, and we need to be able to move to begin to understand the situation and to begin to make decisions about what happened and why did it happen. One of the encouraging aspects was therefore when the president said that he was going to set an inquiry so that we could actually be able to find out exactly what happened. Where did we wrong? Where did we go wrong? Because it wasn't at that point just an issue of Westgate. It's about everything, our responses, how we respond to security issues in this country, and how we behave. The inquiry, therefore, is to bring out a lot about what might be happening that is making us have these security lapses. And immediately after, there were lots of fears, lots of rumors, because for the next few weeks, it was about, be watchful, this other mall might be under attack, this other mall might be under attack. So basically, generally, security is a big issue. Insecurity in Kenya is a big issue that needs to be addressed. And I think the inquiry that we were promised was going to be the beginning to address that situation as an inquiry first, to understand what went wrong, and then make clear indications and decisions about how to move forward on the basis of what comes out of that inquiry. And obviously, then all Kenyans were really looking forward to that. Now, that hasn't happened. And one of the other things that I need to say, which is very, very important, is that CORD, as a government in the opposition, really is in the process of ensuring that we keep the government in check. It's about putting checks and balances, and that there's a critical role that we play as an opposition. It's really just not a question of coming up and saying we want this or the other. We are connected with the people. We are part of the Kenyans who live in Kenya. We live through the situations and we live through the problems. And therefore, when we are calling upon an inquiry, we're calling upon an inquiry on the basis of what has been happening, on the basis of what everybody is feeling, on the basis of the hopes that such an inquiry might begin to be able to give us the solutions moving forward. So that was the whole idea of the emphasis. And I think Kenyans really demand it, and Kenyans really are looking forward to that inquiry being set up.
So you gave a time limit?
Yes, we did.
2 weeks.
Judging by the mood of CORD
Yes.
during that press conference,
Yes.
one would want to imagine that CORD seems to imagine that insecurity came with the Jubilee government. Insecurity has been in this country for as long as we know.
Yes.
And you're given 2 weeks to the government to set an inquiry. And if it doesn't, if the government ignores so
you see, the way I look at it, and I don't see why the government would want to ignore. I'm looking at it from the starting point that, first of all, it's the government that actually said we are setting up this inquiry. Nobody really raised it, and nobody said we're forcing you to do it. What we're trying to do is hold the government accountable. That if you've said you're going to set this inquiry, please set it so that we can actually move forward to begin to look at the agenda. Of course, security is a big issue. Security has always been there, but it doesn't mean that we don't address the insecurity now during the Jubilee government, because security has always been an issue. Kenyans are dying left, right, and center. The problems of insecurity are still with us. So moving forward, we need to be able to find a way to synergize and find a way to address the problems once and for all. And I think probably with the Westgate, especially it having really been at the extent at which it was, really gives us a starting point, because I think with the Westgate, everybody realized they're vulnerable. Any one of us could have been in that mall. We're not secure anywhere we are. And I know throughout the world, terrorist attacks do take place, but various governments really are very proactive about how they address the issues of insecurity. And therefore, the demand that we are making is a demand for Kenyans moving forward, for us to be able to address the issues in a synthesized way. Because God forbid, hypothetically, if we have another attack, for example, in the near future, what is the implication of that? We'll go back and say, what were the issues? Why did it happen? What should we have done differently? We want to address what we can do differently now, because terrorists are terrorists, and terrorists will always be planning. They always have an agenda. So I think it's good for us in Kenya right now to be able to put our house together and say, and I wouldn't see from a Jubilee perspective why that would be something difficult to do. After all, this was something that came from them, isn't it? This is something that they themselves said they would do.
The explanation that was given yesterday by the TNA chairman,
yes,
was that the government is waiting for forensic report.
Results, yeah.
Yes.
And it is therefore the reason why the president has not set up an inquiry.
Yes.
That for you to give 2 weeks ultimatum,
yes,
you're overshooting yourself.
Yes, but you see, I mean, as much as we're waiting for the forensic reports to come in, and that is critical for any sort of proposal and precision for you now to move on to forming an inquiry. This is a discourse. And you know what we're doing is trying to create an impetus. What we're saying is that this is an urgent issue. It needs to be addressed urgently. There are certain things that can be, for example, speed-tracked. You know, because if, for example, we decide we're waiting for forensic inquiries, and we don't know where those forensic inquiries are going to be completed, then we can have another 1 year, we can have another half a year, we can have another 2 years waiting, and that doesn't help Kenyans.
But considering that the military and the parliamentary committee said there was no looting,
yes,
and of course we saw a CCTV picture showing there was
yes,
at least looting of water.
Yes, and that
so the military might be not very anxious to see any forensic audit,
yes,
any commission of inquiry.
Exactly, exactly. And those are the things that can actually hold back the various contradictions that really took place. We even saw the operation and the way, for example, the lack of coordination that was there. Yeah. That lack of coordination is still going on. And I think we need to be able to bring the government to account and really just put the issues on the table and say, this is the way things need to move. This is the direction things need to go into. And I think the idea is to create the pressure. And that's the most important part. Create the pressure so that we can actually, moving forward, secure the lives of Kenyans. And that even moving forward from the Westgate incident, we started coming up now with policies and ideas about how to address insecurity. Mm-hmm. And one of those that came was the Nyumba Kumi initiative.
Before we move on to that, yes, I'm sure that Kenyans have a lot of views regarding this. So I just want to encourage people to please do to send in their views to our Facebook 22422, and we will ask any questions that you may have, direct them to you so you can answer them. Now, you were moving on to the Nyumba Kumi. Before we move on to that, I just want to discuss the pressure that you say that you're putting on, and this ultimatum, which is something that Mutegi had actually mentioned. So again, I'd like to ask, you know, what action will court take if within 2 weeks this
is something that we're not in a position to discuss now, and it would be dysfunctional for us to say this is what we're going to do in the 14 years, or in the 14 days. One of the things that we need to be very clear about opposition politics and the role that we are playing is that at the end of the day we want to bring to account people, but we also don't want to create a situation of tension and blackmailing and, you know, creating some sort of acrimony, you know. At the end of the day, it's really about trying to push, trying to make that agenda happen. So as to what we shall do, I think that's not really a functional discussion. It's a dysfunctional discussion to have at this particular moment. But we will do everything that we need to do because the issue is so important and so critical. And it's not just an issue of CORD. It's an issue of the country. It's an issue that we need to think about. And I think we want to bring on board the urgency of the situation as represented by the people. Because as COD, we're not getting these notions from nowhere. We're not getting these notions from the sky. The issue of security, for example, in both the Senate and National Assembly is an issue that has taken a lot of sessions. It's come in the form of motions, it's come up in the form of bills, on the floor, discussed, coming up all the time. That means it's something that we are really alive to as something that needs to be addressed very, very urgently. And what I would even think about it and say at the moment, it should be really creating even pressure from the people to say, at the end of the day, can we address this thing as a country? You look at other developed parts of the country, for example, and their response to such situations. And the question we'd be asking is, what have we done, for example, to improve the security situation in the last 2 months after the Westgate attack? Has anything been done, for example?
Sure. So one of the initiatives that was launched, which you had just mentioned, is this Nyumba Kumi initiative, which the coalition seems to have some suspicion around. Perhaps you could enlighten us on what your take is on this Nyumba Kumi.
Because I think when you're addressing a situation, you're looking at what happened and how can we divert such a situation happening from the future. You actually go back and look into what you already have and how to strengthen the institutions that you already have. Chapter 14 of the Constitution gives the docket of security to Kenya Defence Forces, to the National Intelligence Service, and to National Police Service. That is already stipulated. The whole idea of having institutions and building up these institutions so that in the future and in the present, they're able to address security issues becomes very, very critical. Now we have a Westgate attack, and the next thing we're doing, moving away from the institutions that we already have, one that have already been constitutionalized, they're within the Constitution, they've been mandated, there's a procedure and process, and democracy is really about building those institutions. A country's democratic ideals and principles are as good as their institutions. So what would have imagined is that we'd find a way of really looking at these institutions and look at how to build those particular institutions. The immediate reaction was a recommendation and institutionalization of another institution, and that is the Nyumba Kumi. And the Nyumba Kumi notion is a notion that is applied sort of in a different context. We want to bring it up as a security context, maintaining the scenario so that we have this Nyumba Kumi of people who know each other. We're making an assumption that as far as security is concerned, it's only about people, how they know each other and how they can control each other. And therefore, there are various flaws in that reasoning, even to begin with, that I will go into in a few minutes. But our first reaction was to look for another institution that hasn't really been constitutionalized, that hasn't been discussed. We don't know exactly how do we want to apply it. The notion of Nyumba Kumi comes from the Tanzanian policy, and especially during the Ujamaa period, 1960s, especially to 1980s. Basically, the Nyumba Kumi, even in Tanzania now, has failed because it is based on a socialist mindset and ideology about that we already know each other, we're able to take care of each other. I can tell you what the other person is doing, and we can have a consensus about various things. So we have a way of existence that I exist because you exist, and then we share a platform to ensure that we move in the right direction, in the right way. We come into a scenario where suddenly we're looking at a situation in Kenya which is generally capitalist. Sessional Paper 1963 created for Kenya a socialist state, and in Tanzania also in their formulation of the sort of governance they wanted to have, they also settled for socialism. Slowly, gradually, Kenya has moved towards capitalism. Tanzania has also slightly moved to capitalism over time. A system like Nyumba Kumi becomes very difficult to implement in a capitalist system, because capitalist system, people really don't know each other. If you're thinking about a set of 10 people who will know each other, who can be able to control each other, it becomes very, very difficult. In that system, you're meant to have, in about 10 households, a leader who should be able to report. The question is, where will this leader report to, for example? The same institutions that we're talking about are the same institutions that haven't been quizzed enough. And even the reforms that were put, for example, the police reforms that should have been put in place, especially after the investigations into the post-election violence, the commission that came up with those recommendations and the task force report that came up with recommendations, those recommendations haven't really been put into place. The reformation of the security forces has not really been put into place. So the issues still exist. So where do people report from? Or where do people report to in the Nyumba Kumi? who do they actually go to and present their views?
The
And
chief.
will it look
Can they go to the chief of headman?
They can go to the chief and headman,
Yeah.
and the chief and headman will be able to address the issues up to a large extent. But the chief and headman, in the context of security and in the context of, for example, giving specific views, can also have his own influence on those Nyumba Kumis. So, for example, if you're looking at those Nyumba Kumis and strictly in terms of security, that's one thing. But you see that you're opening also a line where it's possible to influence people in terms of other decisions that these people make, because you are leading those people. And therefore, they make decisions in a different way from the projected way that they're meant to make that particular decisions. So basically what we're saying is that already there are institutions, and Nyumba Kumi has not worked in Tanzania. We are suddenly saying, instead of looking at our situation and finding a way out of this situation, let's come up with yet another system which should help us solve the security issues, which becomes a bit
to be fair to the
difficult.
government, I don't think they are going to abandon the other institutions. For instance, the police reforms.
Yes.
They are going to vet the police.
Yes.
The other day they initiated what they are calling rapid resort initiative.
Yes.
The police are being vetted.
Yes.
If the Nyumba Kumi was working, we are told by intelligence that those 4 people who attacked Westgate, they live in Isli. If that system worked, they would have been identified.
What guarantee do you have that they would have been identified? For example, studies in criminology have shown that, for example, most gangsters will not attack where they live. They will attack elsewhere. They'll have a protection mechanism. How sure are you that they will spill the bins? And especially in a country like Kenya, where when you spill the bins, it's not exactly clear that out of your diligence and honesty that you're going to be paid off. How many people go to the police station to report anything? Because people fear that there's going to be a backlash on them. You know, they might go and report, and then maybe even, and we've had various reports of people, for example, who've been arrested. The following day, they've been left out to go. So we have a mechanism that is good on paper. All right? The concept sociologically is very good on paper, that you have people living together, they live in harmony, they report. But the definiteness that the system, such a system will work, are completely in question. And the fact that we have incidences where they haven't worked and where they have been applied gives us really a starting point to say, let's look at the policy implications. Let's discuss the policy implications. Let's look back at our institutions. Let's look at what can work, because the issue of security is so important. Let's not just have a divertory way of looking at it. And even begin to have the conversation among Kenyans about the possibility of such a system working, especially in a community.
Another way of looking at community policing?
Yes,
isn't it the same?
It is related to community policing, and that also brings the same argument. To what extent has community policing really worked? It's been a policy that was passed, I think, after 2002, about 2008. It is there in terms of policy, but community policing, to a large extent, has also not been able to work for the same reasons that I've given. So it's really just a question of, I think, beginning to look at the issue in a macroscopic way rather than in a microscopic way, especially in terms of what has not worked in the past. So if, for example, on the basis of community policing, we'll be able to say, look, we have community policing, we have people who are able to report, we have groups who have formed themselves into security systems who can actually report. And where they report to, that report is actually taken into consideration and it's able to move them to a different level, will be in a totally different situation.
And Dr. Zani, you've raised some very interesting points, and I think that it's an important role that the opposition plays in questioning and critiquing a lot of government activity. But is that just critique without offering solutions?
Yeah.
Now, I've got a question coming in here from one of our viewers who says, Dr. Zani, CORD should be part of the solution of insecurity issue in Kenya instead of opposing everything if you really have an interest in the Kenyan people at heart. So what would your response to that be, that we're seeing a lot of critique from CORD, but we're not really seeing any alternative solutions to the critique that you're posing?
Let me start by saying that the mindset of Kenyans as far as opposition politics is concerned, first of all, needs to change. The notion that when the opposition speaks that all they are doing is going against everything that Jubilee government, first of all, is misplaced, because there's a role of a vibrant opposition in any democracy, and that role is so critical. I think to a large extent we can begin to look at the solutions, but I think the fact that you might not be offering solutions at the time you're offering the critique doesn't mean that now whatever you're saying is null and void. Solutions don't come overnight. Solutions are worked through and thought through. And even from what you're saying, and I've said within CORD that we need to be able also to make our position clear. And after we made that position clear, communicate this message. And I think even from what I'm saying, we're saying, for example, the basis and in terms of our ideologies as CORD, the idea of reforms, the idea of institutions, the idea of law and order, the idea of ensuring that there is no impunity, that we follow the mechanisms that has been put into place is what we need to be able to do. So that in itself, I would think about it as a solution, isn't it? Because we're already saying, let's look at the Constitution, let's look at these organizations and streamline them and find a way of making sure that the security organs can actually deliver. And that is the way to go. So we are offering solutions, but I think in the Kenyans' mind, who want to look at the opposition like everything the opposition says is just cancelling what Jubilee is saying, don't listen to the solutions, but they only see that we are only creating the problem. And as we are even coming in and giving ideas and opposing and saying, this is not a good idea, this is the direction to go, we are doing that with the Kenyans behind us. It's not something that CORD is just coming up with. We are coming up with analysis, we're coming up with facts. We're saying, here is the situation, let's begin to address the situation. So to such a person who is asking the question, what would the alternative be for the opposition? Would the alternative be that the opposition completely keeps quiet? Is the question I would ask such a person.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And what about, the position that, as opposed to just critiquing, that it should be constructive criticism?
But that's exactly what I'm saying. We are offering constructive criticism. We want to create pressure, and we're offering constructive criticism, that there's a way, there's an alternative approach. In fact, what we are doing for this country is we're actually doing a favor to this country. We're saying, let's look at the alternative plan in advance. Let's think through it as Kenyans. Let's dialogue. Because in the next 10 years, if we go to Nyumba Kumi, it doesn't work. Where are we? In terms of security, in terms of mechanisms that we've put into place, we're back exactly where we are. And as always happened in any country, there's always the issue of discourse. And I think I've seen even in the social media, people are coming up and critiquing, asking, for example, in this Nyumba Kumi, what can work, what cannot work, and beginning to bring that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I think this country needs to be able to give the opposition its position and be able to understand the work the opposition does. At the end of the day, what we're looking for is for the good of this country. Opposition does not live outside Kenya. Opposition lives in Kenya. We are going through the scenarios, we're going through the circumstances. Security affects somebody in Jubilee, security affects somebody in CORD. So at the end of the day, it's really about coming together. So I think for me, I'm looking at it as a mindset, for example. And a mindset, for example, I think that is more eminent in people who are pro-government. Let the opposition keep quiet. Let us not hear anything. What the opposition is saying is functional and useful for the government in the long run. And that's the perspective that it needs to be put into.
Sure. And obviously insecurity was the agenda of the meeting in which she read the statement on Tuesday. I've got a comment here that I'd just like to read out. This is from Alex Kitua in Nairobi, and he says, insecurity in our country has gotten out of hand. The issue should be blamed on Kenyans at large, politicians, corrupt police, provincial administrations, and immigration officials. These are the people who have allowed foreigners to cross our country, stay here in our own property, later plan for attacks because they have an agenda. So that's the view of Alex.
And just going on with the view of Alex, we need to move to the next step and ask ourselves, how do we do all this Alex is asking to do? Now, if we have a government in place and they're not responding, or still, because they are responding to an extent, but the problem is still there. So obviously the problem hasn't been solved, and therefore there's still open opportunity for a discourse that needs to continue along Alex's line. Let's look for the solutions. Let's find the solutions. Tomorrow it might be you, tomorrow it might be me, tomorrow it will be my brother, it will be my sister, it will be somebody in the situation. And I think Kenyans are getting wary of that. What I think Kenyans need to do is change their mindset and begin to look at solutions as solutions from wherever they're coming from. As things stand now, the position is the one that is at the best stage to begin that dialogue in presenting the alternative. Let Kenyans also look at the opposition from that perspective and begin to listen to what they're saying and begin to think about that as solutions and how to move forward.
So discussing the opposition, as we're slowly running out of time here, this is what I would like to discuss with you as we wrap up. There's been a lot of talk about a leadership problem in the opposition at CORD, with internal calls within CORD for a restructuring. There's been criticism that there's lack of a legislative agenda within the opposition, and again criticism that CORD isn't really offering solutions, just critiquing, as in the case of Nyumba Kumi. So what would your response be to these criticisms that are coming at the opposition at the moment?
It's interesting for us to know where the criticisms are coming from, because I think in Kenya we all think from a particular perspective, and we query and ask questions from the perspective we're asking from. I'm in CORD Coalition. I can tell you, the CORD Coalition has a legislative agenda. That a legislative agenda has been put in place. The CORD has the whole idea about the leadership. We're coming up with our elections that are coming up in February. These are internal issues to any coalition that people think through about as they build that particular party. We have the potential human resource within the coalition. We have the right people to put in the right positions. That's why we have a democratic process of taking us through, as we would in any other organizations, to work through the coalition, what we need to do in the coalition, come up with leadership that is actually chosen democratically rather than imposed within the coalition. So we are coming up with systems, and we have systems within CORD Coalition to put the coalition into a strong position. So as I said, some of the criticism comes from neither here nor there, but I can tell you, yes.
One example given the CORD's disorganization is the fact that your leader has not been able to appoint spokesperson, to counter the cabinet. That you have there was proposal to appoint people to lead various sectors in government. You haven't been able to do that.
This is happening, and this is going to happen. We already have put in structures, in place structures to ensure that that happens. That is already something that I know is coming up shortly, that we are addressing as a coalition. So that's for very specific issues. We have very specific responses that are targeting specific sectors that those responses need to come from.
As a CORD leader, do you see anything positive the Jubilee government has done? anything
A government that has been put in place has its manifestos and things that it has said is put into place. The effectiveness and the success of that government is going to be put into in terms of the implementation, and not the thought systems and the ideas that are coming through. It's very early in the Jubilee government to make a judgment. And I'll use one example, the laptop projects. If you're asking me the question about whether there's any one thing, educational sector is coming to my mind before, because I've been in the educational sector. And there we are, with all the issues that has been raised around it. The implementation was meant to happen in the first term. It has been pushed to the second term. It's very early in the day for anybody to make a judgment in terms of the success or lack of success. We know very well in Kenya that our issue is never the law, the issue is implementation. It's never the manifestos, the issue is the implementation. We have just begun the process of implementation for both CORD Coalition and for the Jubilee Coalition. At the end of the day, we want something which is for the good of all Kenyans, and that's why we're keeping these checks and balances. As to when we can actually see something has happened, one, it will be at the stage of implementation. Two, it will be after the evaluation of that implementation to see have the gains been attained or not attained, where have the failures been, and then move forward. So when I look at the Jubilee Coalition, and I'm not a spokesman for Jubilee Coalition so that I can say that these have been the successes of Jubilee Coalition. There have been manifestos, there have been programs that are put in place that I've talked about, but we are yet as Kenyans to see one that has been successfully implemented, that we as Kenyans now can say, this one, like the free milk project that we had, for example, during President Moi's time, has been actualized. And even with the free milk project, there were counter-arguments, pro and against, even after that. Free education. After 4 years, there are counter-arguments for that. So it's always a balancing act. But it's a balancing act where the opposition has to be very, very active in the decisions that are being made in the government of the day.
Okay, I just want to wrap up with airing a couple of views that that have come in.
Yes.
This is from Zulukia in Nairobi. She's saying thank you very much for being articulate about the security situation in Kenya and opening our eyes. And then I've got another view coming in here which says tell CORD that giving an ultimatum is a security threat in itself. I am afraid of what CORD is capable of doing. We feel that you are causing civil unrest and not a solution. So I think it's important to address some of these views.
And let me just add that if the CORD coalition really wanted to cause unrest, there were moments before the elections, after the elections, that if as a coalition we wanted to cause unrest, there was so much that was going on. The ruling, the Supreme ruling that came as a result of the court case that were requested or on the way forward after the elections. Let's be fair. There were moments that were such critical moments, that if those were the moments of unrest, I think the leaders in Court Coalition have presented themselves in the most patriotic, most constrained and restrained manner, and I think have shown the level of responsibility they have and accountability they have to this country. So let's not look at sentences and begin to say, oh, here now we're moving towards acrimony. As Court Coalition, we haven't done that. At times where the possibility of doing that might have come up. And I think that in itself is a demonstration about the seriousness of this coalition and the seriousness that we take the peace and stability of this country, the seriousness that we take everything that is dear for this country. It doesn't mean, therefore, as a result of that democracy, we end up having to be stifled, that we cannot be able to present ideas, that if we present ideas, they're seen as ideas that are putting pressure. That is the idea. We are meant to put pressure. We are meant to keep the government of the day in check. That is our role as an opposition. That is the role we are playing. That is the role we intend to play.
Okay,
one of the success stories that Jubilee government would like to gloat about is land, particularly in the coast where you come from. They say they have issued title deeds for
but you've already seen the problems that have come.
Yeah, that's what I wanted you to comment about.
Yeah,
what is the problem with those titles?
Oh, there are various problems with the titles. One, the titles, for example, were not vetted, and now we see, for example, in Kilifi, issues coming up of title deeds for actual land that maybe didn't exist at the time that it was being allocated. One of the ways, and I think this is where the acrimony started, was that there was a National Land Commission in place, which should have been involved in the process of actually finding out what has happened. The land issue, especially in the coast, has been an issue that is really a very, very sensitive issue for a very, very long time. We needed a very structured process in how we're addressing our land issues. And the notion of that there were title deeds and these title deeds had been processed needed still to go through a vetting process, find out whether this land should have been allocated, has it been allocated to the right people.
Are you suggesting that the president was misled to give fake titles?
I would not know, because that is a Jubilee issue. Yeah. And the way they've tackled, I'm talking about what has happened. I'm talking about the reaction from the ground, and the disharmony that it has caused at the ground level. Like, for example, people have title deeds that, for example, even when they went to collect those title deeds, they were told there's a problem. I know, for example, in Kilifi, they started a vetting process for those titles even before they gave them. And the same thing happened in the Kwale County. That means a step had probably been skipped in the process, or not enough communication and dialogue had taken place prior to the actual exercise that was done. And it is already in the news, the sort of acrimony and the sort of uprisings that are coming as a result of those land titles and the issues that are surrounding all that, and the general issues surrounding land, to the latest that has happened about appointments that have been made, and the National Assembly has been discussing this. And this comes back to the whole idea of structures and institutions. There's a reason why you have structures and institutions in any country. And it's about really trying to build. When you build the institutions, you build the democracy of that country, so that it's not about the people, because people will come and go. Today it will be you, today it will be somebody else. But when you build strong institutions, you're building a country of the future that no matter who is there, we have an order of doing things. We have a precedence that has been set, and you need to fit into that precedent. And then you realize then you really reduce on the level of chaos and disorder that comes as a result. And it goes back again to the idea of institutionalism and moving from what we have already decided to do and keeping to that. You know, even including the whole issues of NGOs, for example, and the amendment.
There's a whole barrage of issues that are associated with that, and I'm
NGOs.
sure we'll love to invite you to come again and talk about these,
just a little bit on that, because
time.
That's important, because especially for the NGOs and the 15% capping, that they can only receive up to 15%, and the other one, if it has to be extended, has to come through a federation, and the process and procedures for that. For example, we know NGOs in the health sector, up to 80% funding has come from those specific NGOs in the regions that the government has not been able to reach out. Mandera, marginalized communities. We need to think broadly. What is the implication of such an amendment just for the lives of Kenyans? Because Kenyans out there are living life in real time and facing real problems. in education, in health, in infrastructure.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to pull together in terms of how to address those issues in a very streamlined
And we
manner.
look forward to having you again in studio to discuss this NGO bill as well as several other issues which we've just touched on, but we are unfortunately out of time. But thank you very much, Dr. Zani. It's been a pleasure having you. I think it's been very enlightening to get the opposition's view on a lot of current affairs and issues at the moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for watching, and that is our interview for the hour. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
You too.
And hope to talk.